I still remember the exact moment everything changed, even though it happened years ago. It wasn't dramatic at first. No shouting, no broken plates, no doors slammed. Just one sentence, said casually with a laugh in front of people who would never forget it. A sentence that made the room feel smaller, the air heavier, and my place in the world suddenly uncertain. My sister leaned back in her chair, rolled her eyes and said, "Mom and Dad only had you by accident anyway." Everyone laughed. And just like that, I stopped feeling like I belonged. We were at a family gathering, one of those events that's supposed to feel warm and safe. Relatives I hadn't seen in years, family, friends, cousins, neighbors. The kind of night filled with noise, food, and stories from the past. I was already uncomfortable, sitting quietly, trying not to draw attention to myself. My sister, on the other hand, was always confident. She had a way of taking over a room, of making people listen. She was older, louder, sharper with her words. And that night, her words landed like a punch I didn't see coming. At first, I thought she was joking. That's what everyone else seemed to think. A harmless comment, a bit of sibling humor. But when I looked around, no one corrected her. No one said she was wrong. My parents didn't rush to defend me. They didn't laugh either, but they stayed silent. That silence was louder than her words. It told me everything I was afraid to hear. That maybe this wasn't just a joke. Maybe it was the truth. I felt my face burn. My chest tightened. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice wouldn't come out. I was suddenly aware of every pair of eyes in the room, even if they weren't actually looking at me. I felt small, exposed, like my entire existence had been reduced to an accident. Something unplanned. Something unwanted. I excused myself, saying I needed some air, and walked out before anyone could stop me. Outside, the night was quiet. Too quiet. I stood there alone, listening to distant laughter coming from inside the house. That laughter didn't feel like it was meant for me anymore. I replayed her words over and over in my head. Only had you by accident. It explained so much. The favoritism. The way my sister always came first. The way my parents seemed distant with me, not cruel, just disconnected. Like I was always slightly out of place in my own family. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if my life was built on a mistake. I thought about all the times I tried to make them proud. All the times I felt like I had to earn my place. I wondered if my parents ever looked at me and thought of what could have been different. I wondered if my sister had always known this, and if that's why she felt so comfortable saying it out loud. Days passed, but the feeling didn't go away. I waited for my parents to bring it up, to explain, to reassure me. They didn't. Life just continued as if nothing had happened. That hurt more than the comment itself. It felt like confirmation. Like silence was their answer. I started pulling away without realizing it. I spoke less at home. I stayed out longer. I kept my thoughts to myself. The house that once felt familiar started to feel like a place I was only visiting. My sister never apologized. In fact, she acted like nothing was wrong. She went back to being her usual self, confident and untouchable. Every time I looked at her, I felt a mix of anger and shame. Anger for saying it. Shame for believing it. I didn't know which one was worse. I started wondering if I was overreacting. Maybe it didn't mean what I thought it meant. Maybe I was just too sensitive. But deep down, I knew that words like that don't come from nowhere. As weeks turned into months, the distance between me and my family grew. Conversations felt forced. Dinners were quiet. I felt like a ghost in my own home. I began to imagine what life would be like if I wasn't there at all. Not in a dark way, but in a practical one. Would they notice? Would things be easier? Would my absence make more sense than my presence ever did? The idea started as a thought, then slowly became a plan. I told myself I just needed space. Time to figure things out. Time to stop feeling like a mistake. I started saving money quietly. I looked for opportunities far away from home. I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking. Not my parents. Not my sister. I didn't trust them with something that fragile. I barely trusted myself. The day I left wasn't dramatic either. No goodbye speeches. No final confrontations. Just a bag, a note I never left behind, and a door that closed quietly behind me. I told myself I'd come back once I felt stronger. Once I understood who I was without their labels. But days turned into weeks, weeks into years. And before I knew it, I had vanished from their lives for 12 long years. During that time, I built a new life. New people. New memories. A version of myself that wasn't defined by being an accident. But no matter how far I went, that moment followed me. My sister's words echoed in my mind during quiet nights and difficult choices. I wondered if they ever talked about me. If they wondered where I was. If my disappearance confirmed something they already believed. 12 years is a long time to be gone. Long enough for wounds to harden. Long enough for truths to stay buried. And when I finally came face to face with my family again, I realized something shocking. The story I believed for over a decade might not have been the full truth. And what I discovered next forced me to question everything I thought I knew about my sister, my parents, and the night that changed my life forever. Coming back after 12 years didn't feel real at first. I stood outside the house I grew up in, staring at the familiar walls that somehow looked smaller than I remembered. The paint had changed. The old tree in the yard was gone. But the front door was the same one I had quietly closed behind me all those years ago. My heart was racing, not because I didn't know what I'd find inside, but because I was afraid of what I might feel. I had spent over a decade convincing myself I didn't care. Standing there proved I was wrong. I hadn't planned a dramatic return. There was no big announcement, no message saying I was coming. Life had slowly pushed me back here. A job opportunity nearby. A feeling that I was running out of places to hide. And a question that had never stopped haunting me: what if my sister was wrong? Or worse, what if she was right and I had spent 12 years running from a truth I couldn't change? Before I knocked, I thought about the years I missed. Holidays spent with strangers who became friends. Birthdays I celebrated alone. Moments when I wanted to call my parents but stopped myself, convinced they didn't really need to hear from me. I told myself I was protecting my peace, but deep down I was protecting myself from being hurt again. Leaving had given me control. Coming back meant giving some of that up. When the door finally opened, my mom stood there frozen like she was looking at a ghost. For a second, neither of us spoke. Her face changed slowly, confusion turning into shock, then something I couldn't fully read. She said my name quietly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to say it. I waited for anger, for questions, for blame. None of that came. Just silence and a step back to let me in. Inside, everything felt heavy. Not tense exactly, but unfinished. Like a conversation paused for 12 years and never resumed. My dad appeared from the living room, his expression just as stunned. He looked older. Tired. Seeing that did something to me I wasn't prepared for. I realized I had imagined them frozen in time, still the same people who let that silence hang in the air all those years ago. They weren't. And neither was I. We talked, but not about the night I left. Not about my sister's words. Not about why I disappeared. We talked about safe things. Or the weather. How long it had been. Every sentence felt like it was circling something dangerous. Something no one wanted to touch yet. My sister wasn't there. She had moved out years ago, started her own life just like I had. The difference was she never had to leave to do it. Over the next few days I stayed nearby. Not in the house, but close enough to visit. Each time I saw my parents, I noticed things I hadn't before. The way my mom watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. The way my dad hesitated before answering certain questions. It felt like they were carrying something heavy, something they weren't sure I knew. That scared me more than any argument ever could. I started remembering moments from my childhood through a different lens. The times my parents seemed distant. The way my sister always took the lead. At the time, I thought it was just how families worked. Now, I wondered if there was more behind it. Not neglect exactly, but guilt. Or fear. Or something they didn't know how to explain to a kid who already felt out of place. One evening, while helping my mom clean up after dinner, I almost asked her. The words were right there. I wanted to know if what my sister said was true. If I was an accident. If my existence had been a mistake they never planned for. But the fear stopped me. I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. And judging by the way her hands shook slightly as she stacked the plates, I wasn't sure she was ready either. Instead, I began asking questions about my sister. Where she lived now. What she was doing. My mom answered carefully, choosing her words like they mattered more than usual. I could tell there was distance there too. Not anger, but something unresolved. It made me wonder if that night had affected more than just me. If my sister's comment had cracked something in the family that never fully healed. Late one night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through old photos my mom had shared online over the years. Pictures of holidays, birthdays, graduations. I was missing from all of them. Not cropped out. Just absent. It was strange seeing proof of a life that went on without me. But what caught my attention was something else. In the older photos from when I was very young, my parents looked different. Nervous maybe. Like they were trying very hard to get something right. I started to wonder if my sister had overheard something she misunderstood. Or if she had known something she wasn't supposed to share. The more I thought about it, the more complicated it felt. Families have secrets. Sometimes they're meant to protect. Sometimes they just grow until they hurt everyone involved. I had always assumed my sister was cruel that night. Now I wasn't so sure it was that simple. When I finally did see her again, it wasn't planned. We ran into each other unexpectedly, and the air between us felt thick with everything we hadn't said. She looked surprised but not angry. More guarded. Like she had been expecting this moment someday but hoped it wouldn't come. We exchanged a few awkward words, nothing meaningful. But her eyes avoided mine, and that told me more than any apology could have. As I drove away that night, my mind raced. If my sister felt guilty, what did she know? And if my parents were avoiding the truth, what were they afraid of losing by telling it? I had come back looking for closure. Instead, I found more questions. Questions that had the power to change how I saw my entire life. I could feel it building, that moment when everything would finally come out. But not yet. The silence was still there, hanging between us, heavier than ever. And until someone finally broke it, I was left standing in the middle of a story that still didn't have an ending. After seeing my sister again, I couldn't stop replaying that brief encounter in my head. Her hesitation, the way she avoided eye contact, the stiffness in her voice. It didn't feel like confidence anymore. It felt like someone carrying a secret for too long. That realization followed me everywhere, even into conversations that had nothing to do with her. Every laugh felt forced. Every silence felt intentional. I started to understand that my disappearance hadn't erased the past. It had only paused it. I began spending more time with my parents, slowly, carefully. I wanted to observe without pushing. I noticed how my dad changed the subject whenever my childhood came up. How my mom corrected herself mid-sentence like she almost said too much. There was a pattern to it, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. They weren't just avoiding one night from 12 years ago. They were avoiding an entire chapter of our lives. One afternoon, I found an old box in the garage while helping my dad organize some things. It was filled with photos, cards, and papers from years ago. He stiffened when he saw it open, almost like I had crossed an invisible line. I apologized and offered to put it back, but he told me it was fine. His voice didn't match his expression. I flipped through the contents slowly, feeling like I was touching something fragile. There were photos of my sister as a baby. Dozens of them. Then, after a long gap, a few of me. Not many. Just enough to prove I was there. I didn't say anything, but the unevenness sat heavy in my chest. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to ask if it meant something. Instead, I closed the box and carried it back to the shelf. Some questions felt too big to ask out loud. Later that night, I called a friend who had known me during the years I was gone. Someone who had seen me build myself from scratch. I told them I was back home and explained what was happening. They listened quietly, then asked a question that hit harder than I expected. What if they were trying to protect you? I laughed it off at first, but after we hung up, the idea lingered. Protect me from what? The next time I saw my sister, she was different. Less guarded, but more serious. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, pretending this was a normal sibling catch-up. We talked about surface-level things. Jobs. Cities. Time passing too fast. But underneath every word was that night hanging between us. I waited for her to bring it up. She didn't. At one point she started to say something, then stopped. She looked at me like she was measuring the weight of her words. You really disappeared, she said finally. It wasn't an accusation. It sounded more like disbelief. I told her I needed space back then. That was true, but not the whole truth. She nodded like she understood more than I was saying. I wanted to ask her why she said what she did all those years ago. I wanted to know if she believed it or if she was repeating something she heard. But the fear of reopening that wound stopped me. Part of me wasn't ready to hear her answer. And judging by the way she clenched her hands around her coffee cup, she might not have been ready to give it. As days passed, I started noticing small cracks forming. My mom would start crying unexpectedly, then apologize and say she was just tired. My dad would stay up late pacing the house. They were reacting to my presence even if they didn't say it. It made me realize something uncomfortable. My leaving had hurt them too. Maybe not in the way I imagined, but enough to change them. Still, that didn't explain the silence. If I was an accident, why not just say it? If I wasn't, why let me believe it for 12 years? The questions kept stacking up, each one heavier than the last. I started journaling again, trying to make sense of it all. Writing became the only place where I could be completely honest about how confused and angry I still felt. One night, while helping my mom look for a document, we came across an old envelope with my name on it. She froze when she saw it. I didn't even have to ask. Her reaction said enough. She quickly put it away, saying it was nothing important. I didn't push, but my heart was pounding. That envelope wasn't meant for me. Or maybe it was, and the timing never felt right. I realized then that everyone in this story had been waiting. waiting for the right moment. Waiting for someone else to speak first. My sister waiting for me to come back. My parents waiting for the past to stay buried. And me waiting for a truth I wasn't sure I could handle. The tension wasn't just unresolved. It was growing. I began to wonder if my sister's comment wasn't meant to hurt me, but to expose something. Maybe she was angry at our parents. Maybe she felt overshadowed or burdened by something she never asked for. That idea shifted how I saw her. Not as the villain in my story, but as someone reacting to a truth she didn't know how to process. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how fragile our family really was. Built on love, yes, but also on avoidance. On unspoken rules. On the hope that silence could protect everyone. My disappearance had cracked that illusion. My return threatened to shatter it completely. I could feel a confrontation coming even if no one said it out loud. The tension was thick, waiting for the smallest spark. I didn't know who would break first. Me demanding answers. My sister overwhelmed by guilt. Or my parents finally ready to tell the truth. All I knew was that whatever happened next would change everything. And as much as I wanted closure, part of me was terrified of what that closure might cost. By the time the weekend arrived, the tension felt impossible to ignore. It sat in every room, in every pause between words. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath. I could tell something was coming, not because anyone said it, but because everyone was acting like they were preparing for impact. My parents moved around more carefully, like one wrong step could break something fragile. My sister started calling more often, then canceling plans at the last minute. And I felt stuck in the middle, waiting for the truth to finally surface. That old envelope stayed on my mind. I couldn't forget the look on my mom's face when she saw it. Fear mixed with regret. It made me realize that whatever the truth was, it wasn't simple. It wasn't just about being an accident or not. It felt bigger, heavier, like a decision that had shaped all our lives. I started imagining worst-case scenarios, then worse ones. Each thought made my chest tighten a little more. I decided I couldn't wait forever. If I didn't ask, this silence would keep controlling everything. One evening when my parents and I were alone, I tried to open the conversation. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked why things felt so complicated around my childhood. The room went quiet instantly. My dad looked down at his hands. My mom's eyes filled with tears she didn't wipe away. "We just wanted to do what we thought was best," my mom said softly. That sentence alone told me more than I was ready to hear. Best for who? For me? For them? For my sister? I asked what she meant, but my dad stood up abruptly, saying it wasn't the right time. That stopped the conversation cold. The unfinished words hung in the air, louder than anything said before. I realized then that the truth wasn't just hidden. It was actively being protected. Later that night, my sister texted me asking if I wanted to talk. Just that. No details. No explanation. I stared at my phone for a long time before replying yes. We agreed to meet the next day. I barely slept, my mind racing through everything she might say. An apology. A confession. Or something that would change how I saw my parents forever. When we met, she looked exhausted. Not physically but emotionally. Like someone who had been carrying a weight for years and was finally close to dropping it. We sat in silence longer than usual. Then she said, "I never meant for you to disappear." Her voice cracked slightly when she said it. That caught me off guard. I had always believed she didn't care. I asked her why she said what she said back then. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "I thought you already knew." That one sentence sent a chill through me. Knew what? The fact that she assumed I knew something made everything feel more dangerous. Like the truth had been in the room my entire life, just out of reach. Before she could continue, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and went pale. It was our mom. She didn't answer. She silenced the call and looked back at me, eyes wide. "They don't want me talking to you alone," she said quietly. That confirmed everything I feared. There was coordination. Control. A story carefully maintained for years. I started to feel angry, not explosive anger, but the kind that burns slowly. I told her that whatever it was, I deserved to know. That I had lost 12 years of my life believing I was a mistake. She nodded, tears forming. "I know," she whispered. "And that's why this is so hard." Her words didn't comfort me. They made the tension unbearable. Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. My parents became more distant, more careful with their words. My sister stopped replying to messages altogether. It felt like everyone was retreating at the same time, like they were hoping the moment would pass if they waited long enough. But it didn't. The pressure only grew. I began questioning everything. Memories I once trusted now felt unreliable. Moments I thought were proof of distance might have been proof of fear instead. I wondered how early this secret started shaping our family. Was my sister resentful because she knew something I didn't? Were my parents overprotective because they were afraid of what would happen if I found out? One evening, my dad finally asked me to sit down with him. Just the two of us. His hands shook slightly as he spoke. He said there were things he wanted to explain, but he wasn't sure how. That they had made choices years ago believing they were protecting everyone involved. I asked him directly if my sister was right. If I was an accident. He didn't answer. He just closed his eyes. That silence felt heavier than any confession could have. It told me the truth wasn't a simple yes or no. It was layered, complicated, and tied to something painful. I realized then that no matter what I was about to learn, it would change how I saw myself forever. By the end of the week, everything felt like it was reaching a breaking point. My sister finally sent one message: "We need to talk. All of us." No emojis. No extra words. Just that. I knew what it meant. The conversation everyone had been avoiding was finally unavoidable. As I prepared for that meeting, my mind raced with possibilities. I imagined explanations that made sense of the silence. I imagined truths that hurt more than the one I had believed for 12 years. And I imagined walking away again, this time not out of confusion, but out of clarity. Whatever was about to be revealed, I could feel it coming closer. The walls of silence were cracking. And once they fell, there would be no going back. The message from my sister stayed on my screen long after I read it. "We need to talk. All of us." It felt final, like a door closing behind me before I could decide whether I was ready to walk through it. I knew this conversation had been coming, but knowing didn't make it easier. If anything, it made the waiting worse. Every hour that passed felt heavier, like the truth was pressing closer from all sides. We agreed to meet at my parents' house the next evening. That place had always been the center of everything, and somehow it felt right and wrong at the same time to return there for this. I arrived early, my stomach tight, my thoughts racing. I kept reminding myself that whatever they were hiding, I had survived 12 years without it. But that didn't stop the fear that this truth could undo everything I had rebuilt. When my sister walked in, she didn't look at me at first. She greeted our parents quietly, then sat down, hands clasped together like she was bracing herself. My mom kept pacing, pretending to straighten things that didn't need fixing. My dad stayed seated, staring at the floor. No one spoke for a long moment. The silence felt intentional now, like it was the final calm before something broke. "I can't keep doing this," my sister said suddenly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. "I can't keep pretending nothing happened." My mom stopped pacing. My dad looked up sharply. I felt my heart start to pound. This wasn't how I expected it to begin. It wasn't me demanding answers. It was her. My sister took a deep breath and looked straight at our parents. "You told me not to say anything," she continued. "You told me it would hurt them. But look what happened anyway." She finally looked at me then, her eyes filled with something that looked like regret mixed with frustration. "They left. For 12 years. I felt a strange mix of validation and dread. Validation that I wasn't crazy, that something real had happened that night. Dread because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about choices made long before I could understand them. My mom started crying openly then, sinking into a chair like her legs had given out. My dad rubbed his face with his hands, like he was exhausted just thinking about what was coming next. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he said quietly. That sentence again. The same one my mom had used days earlier. It felt rehearsed, like something they had told themselves for years. I asked them what they were protecting me from. My voice shook despite my effort to stay calm. No one answered right away. My sister shifted uncomfortably, then spoke again. "You weren't supposed to find out like that," she said. "Not at all." That made my chest tighten. "Find out what?" She explained that growing up, she overheard things. Arguments whispered behind closed doors. Late-night conversations she wasn't meant to hear. She said she didn't understand all of it at the time, but she knew enough to feel angry. Angry that everything felt complicated. Angry that our parents treated me differently, not harsher but softer. Like I might break if the truth ever touched me. I listened, barely breathing. The idea that my sister saw me as fragile hurt in a way I didn't expect. She admitted that the night she made that comment, she wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to force the truth into the open. She thought if she said it out loud, our parents would finally explain everything. Instead they froze. And I disappeared. "That's not even the worst part," she said quietly, staring at her hands. My stomach dropped. If that wasn't the worst part, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what was. My dad stood up slowly like he needed the movement to keep himself steady. He said there was more to the story than an accident or not. That my existence wasn't a mistake, but it also wasn't simple. He said the circumstances around my birth were complicated, involving decisions they never expected to face. Decisions that left scars they thought time would erase. I pressed him to explain, but he hesitated. My mom shook her head slightly, like she was silently begging him to stop. That reaction told me everything I needed to know. Whatever this was, it wasn't just emotional. It was something that could change how I saw my identity, my place in this family, maybe even my past. Then my sister dropped something I wasn't prepared for. She said there were documents. Papers my parents had hidden away for years. Things she had seen once by accident and never forgot. Things that explained why they were so afraid of this conversation. She didn't know all the details, but she knew enough to know this wasn't just a family misunderstanding. It was a secret built on fear. The room felt like it was closing in. I realized that my disappearance hadn't just been a reaction to pain. It had been a disruption. Me leaving had kept this secret intact. Me coming back threatened to expose it. That made everything feel more dangerous. Not physically but emotionally. Like one wrong word could tear the family apart for good. I asked where those documents were now. My parents exchanged a look that made my heart sink. My mom whispered that they had planned to tell me someday. When the time was right. When I was ready. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. 12 years of silence and they still thought timing was the issue. The second twist hit me then, not through words but through realization. This wasn't just about my past. It was about control. About deciding who deserved to know the truth and who didn't. About shaping a narrative and hoping no one questioned it. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if my sister was the villain in my story at all. As the conversation unraveled, emotions spilled out faster than anyone could manage. My sister admitted she had lived with guilt ever since I left, wondering if her words had destroyed something that could never be fixed. My parents admitted they were terrified of losing me if I ever knew everything. The irony of that statement almost broke me. By the end of the night, nothing was resolved. If anything, the stakes felt higher than ever. I knew there was a truth waiting, one that explained the silence, the fear, and the careful way my parents treated me. But I also knew that once it came out, there would be no undoing it. As I left the house, the weight of that realization followed me into the dark. I had come back looking for answers about one sentence spoken years ago. Now I was standing at the edge of a truth that could rewrite my entire life. And I wasn't sure whether I was more afraid of hearing it, or of what would happen if I didn't. I didn't sleep that night. The conversation replayed in my head over and over, every pause, every look, every word that almost came out but didn't. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep living in the space between half-truths and silence. If there were documents, if there was a story that explained everything, I needed to see it myself. Not filtered. Not softened. Just the truth. I went back to my parents' house later that day. They were already expecting me. I could tell by the way the door opened before I even knocked. My mom looked like she hadn't slept either. My dad seemed calmer, but it was the kind of calm that comes after making a hard decision. They invited me in, and for the first time since I returned, no one tried to change the subject. My dad went to the bedroom and came back with a folder. Plain. Worn at the edges. The kind of thing you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. He held it for a moment before handing it to me like he was giving away something fragile. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were papers I didn't fully understand at first. Dates. Signatures. Official language that felt cold and distant. Then it clicked. I wasn't an accident. Not in the way my sister had said it. I wasn't unplanned, unwanted, or a mistake. I was intentional. But not in the way I had always assumed either. I was born into a situation my parents never expected to face. A situation that forced them to make choices they thought would protect everyone involved. They told me the rest slowly. Carefully. Years ago, before I was born, there had been a crisis in our extended family. A child who needed stability. A situation that couldn't be made public without causing lasting damage. My parents stepped in, not because they had to, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. They raised me as their own, legally and emotionally, but with a fear that never fully went away. A fear that the truth, if handled wrong, would hurt me more than help me. That was the real reason for the distance. The softness. The overthinking. They weren't unsure about loving me. They were terrified of losing me the moment I learned where I came from. They thought silence would keep everything intact. Instead, it pushed me away. I sat there stunned. Angry. Relieved. All at once. 12 years of believing I was an accident, when the truth was far more complicated. I looked at my mom and saw regret written all over her face. Not for raising me but for not trusting me enough to tell me sooner. My dad apologized, not with excuses but with honesty. He admitted they underestimated how damaging silence could be. Later that evening my sister came over. She looked nervous, like she was walking into a storm she started years ago. When she saw the folder in my hands she knew. Her shoulders dropped, and she let out a breath she seemed to have been holding her entire life. She told me she had pieced parts of it together as a teenager and felt powerless. The night she made that comment, she wasn't trying to be cruel. She was angry at our parents for lying and angry at herself for knowing something she couldn't explain properly. Hearing that didn't erase the pain, but it finally gave it context. We talked for hours. Real conversations this time. No avoiding. No pretending. Just the truth, messy and uncomfortable. For the first time, I felt like everyone in the room was standing on the same ground. The main conflict that had shaped my life wasn't about being unwanted. It was about fear, control, and silence passed down with good intentions and terrible results. By the end of the night, something shifted. The tension didn't disappear completely, but it loosened. I felt lighter than I had in years. Like a story I had been telling myself was finally rewritten with facts instead of guesses. I thought that was the end of it. The closure I had been chasing for 12 years. But then came the final twist. As I was getting ready to leave, my mom stopped me. She hesitated, then said there was one more thing. Something they hadn't planned to share yet, but after everything, it didn't feel right to keep it hidden. She handed me another envelope. Newer than the folder. My name written on it in her handwriting. Inside was a letter. It wasn't from my parents. It was from the person connected to my birth. Someone who had been watching from a distance all these years. Someone who knew where I was now. Someone who had been waiting for the truth to come out before stepping forward. The letter didn't explain everything. It didn't ask for anything either. It simply said they hoped one day we could talk when I was ready. I stood there, heart racing, realizing that the story wasn't quite over after all. The biggest conflict of my life had finally been resolved, but it had opened a new door I wasn't expecting. A door to answers I hadn't even known to ask. As I walked away that night, the house behind me felt different. Not perfect, not healed, but honest. And for the first time since that sentence was spoken in front of everyone years ago, I didn't feel like an accident. Still, with that letter folded in my pocket, I knew one thing for sure. The truth had finally caught up with me. And it wasn't done yet. The letter stayed with me for days before I opened it again. Not because I was afraid of the words, but because I was afraid of what they might change. For 12 years, I had built my life around the idea that I was unwanted. Now that belief was gone, and in its place was something far more complex. I realized healing wasn't going to happen all at once. It would come in layers just like the truth did. I finally sat down alone and read the letter slowly. It was gentle, careful. There was no pressure in it, no demands. Just an explanation written with respect. The person explained why distance had been kept, how they trusted my parents to give me stability, and how watching from afar was never meant to feel like abandonment. They said they didn't want to disrupt my life unless I chose it. That one line stayed with me. Unless I chose it. For the first time, I felt like I actually had a choice. Over the next few weeks, I spent more time with my parents, not trying to fix everything but just being present. Conversations became easier. We talked about the past honestly without defensiveness. They admitted their mistakes openly, especially the silence. I admitted how deeply it had shaped me, how my self-worth suffered because of what I believed. Those conversations didn't erase the pain, but they softened it. My sister and I also started rebuilding something new. It wasn't the same relationship we might have had if that night never happened, but it was real. She apologized properly this time, not just for the words she said, but for not fighting harder afterward. I could see how much she had carried too. Guilt changes people, and she had been living with it quietly for years. Forgiving her didn't mean forgetting, but it did mean letting go of the version of her I had turned into a villain. Eventually the house stopped feeling heavy. Not perfect, not free of history, but lighter. Laughter returned in small moments. Shared meals didn't feel forced anymore. The silence that once controlled everything lost its power once it was finally broken. As for the letter, I didn't rush into anything. I thought about it carefully, talked it through with people I trusted. I realized something important during that time. The truth about where I came from didn't define who I was. The life I built during those 12 years mattered just as much. More in some ways. I wasn't starting over. I was adding a chapter. When I finally decided to respond, it wasn't out of obligation. It was out of curiosity and peace. I wrote back honestly, without promises, without expectations. Just openness. That felt right. Whatever came next would happen at its own pace. Looking back now, the sentence my sister said all those years ago still hurts, but it no longer controls me. It was the spark, not the whole story. The real damage came from silence, from assumptions, from everyone trying to protect each other in ways that ended up doing the opposite. That's something I carry forward as a lesson. I disappeared for 12 years because I thought I didn't belong. I came back and learned that belonging isn't always simple, but it's something that can be rebuilt when people are willing to tell the truth. Families aren't perfect. They're complicated, emotional, and sometimes deeply flawed. But healing starts the moment honesty replaces fear. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that unanswered questions can shape your entire life if you let them. And that sometimes the truth you're afraid of isn't what breaks you. It's what finally sets you free. Today, I don't see myself as an accident. I see myself as someone who survived misunderstanding, silence, and distance, and still chose to come back. And that choice changed everything.